Hi, everybody. I'm Manish Bhargav. I'm Product Manager for Internationalization and Localization efforts at Google. Today, we are going to talk about developing for global audience. Before we do that, let me try to understand this audience a little bit more. How many of you speak more than one language? Good, nearly 100%. How many of you here are Android developers? Okay. How many of you are Google Plus, Chrome, web developers? Nearly 60-40. Okay. I'll make sure I'll touch upon both the areas. How many of you have your app or product localized in more than one language? Keep your hands raised if it is in more than 5 languages. More than 10 languages? Okay, 15 languages. 20. 1, 2, 3, 4. 30 languages. Nobody. Oh, there is one. Why don't you? You are definitely ahead of the curve already. Why don't I give you an Android? Perfect. Okay. Okay, so that's good. I saw a number of you raise your hands in terms of more than 10 languages. So let me give an overview of. So first, we'll touch upon why it makes sense to go international. We'll discuss the steps that you need to go global and to make really an awesome app for worldwide users. And then I will talk about some strategic considerations, some resources, and practical tips that we at Google over time have collected, and that should help you in overcoming the common pitfalls so that you can essentially, as you go in your effort to go international. So first question is, why go international? I have users, I have revenue, what am I missing? So here is a pie chart which shows internet users by region. So clearly, if you are developing for just one region, and it could be any of the regions there, you are getting only a piece of the pie. In particular, if you are developing for North America, you are only getting 11.4% of internet users. Let's look at it from another perspective. Internet users by language. Again, a similar pie chart, this time by language. And it's the same story. If you are just developing for a particular language, you are getting only a piece of the pie. Specifically, if you're developing just for English, you are getting about 1/4 of internet users. But more importantly, you are missing out on 75% of internet users. So that's from the user side. What about the revenue side? Here I'm showing you the revenue trend of a number of companies, Facebook, Zynga, Google, VMware, and you will see a common trend. The red portion, which is the international revenue as percentage of total revenue, is increasing year over year. So whether you are driven by number of internet users or the users for your app, your product, or if you are driven by revenue, going international helps your cause. So again, many of you mentioned your Android developers. So let me go a little bit deeper into the Android opportunity. So as you heard yesterday in the keynote speech, Sundar mentioned that Android ecosystem is growing at really good pace. 900 million Android activations, 48 billion app installs, and again, the numbers are growing, and especially from an emerging market perspective, and we'll talk about that. If you look at from a play revenue perspective as well, look at how the US revenue has pretty much remained constant from a graph, while other countries, more specifically Korea and Japan, have grown significantly over time. So if you are only developing for English, you are missing out on this huge revenue uptake, which is possible if you are developing for these other languages. So here is a graph a table which shows the internet growth and penetration numbers. This is taken from Mary Meeker's 2012 Internet Trends talk. I would like you to focus on two columns. One is the year-over-year growth. And notice some of the emerging markets, the numbers are in solid double digits. India, 26%, Indonesia, 58%. Look at US, 3%. Let's also look at the last column, which is the population penetration. This is number of internet users as percentage of total population. India, 11%. Indonesia, 23%. US, 78%. So the message here is the growth of internet users as it is today is really in emerging markets. And what is more striking is there is room for growth there. And again, it's huge in terms of look at the basically early teens or late teens for most of the emerging markets in terms of the population penetration, while it is more or less saturated in some of the developed markets. Another point which I want to touch upon in terms of why international makes sense is this is the percentage change in advertising spend. Notice Europe is negative 0.4, US is 1.8%, but the real growth is again coming from Asia, Middle East, Latin America. So again, if you're not developing for these markets, you are missing out in terms of both from a revenue, as we saw here, but also from the user's perspective. So I hope I have given you enough evidence to show why it makes sense. And in today's world, developing for global audience is not a luxury, but it's really necessity, and it's a huge potential opportunity there as well. So the next question is, I understand that, what do I need to do for my app to go global? So one thing which I'll clear from the very beginning is developing for global audience is not just getting your app translation. So it's much more than translation. You can think of going global as a two-step process. First, internationalization, and second, localization. So internationalization, I18N, I followed by 18 characters in N, and localization, L10N, L followed by 10 characters in N. What is internationalization? Internationalization is designing and coding to enable support for languages, region, and cultural differences. It includes things like externalizing localizable resources, presenting dates, time, number formats in a locale relevant form, processing user input, sorting data, and supporting characters in all languages, be it double byte characters in Eastern Asian languages, or bidirectional display for Middle Eastern languages, or diacritics, supporting diacritics for Central European languages. In terms of localization, it's adapting the look and feel of your product, of your app, for language, regions, and culture. It includes translation, local defaults, and custom features. So the question is, getting it right, does it really matter? So in some cases, it's embarrassing bloopers. So for example, I show an example here. This is Google Sites, the English version, where the font size was SML for small, medium, and large. Anyone here can read Arabic? No? OK, so I'll try. When it got translated, it became Saturday, Monday, large. And part of it is, again, did it really impact in terms of sites usage? Not really, but it's an embarrassing situation where if not done right, it impacts in meaningful ways. But in some cases, it is more important. It affects your bottom line. So here is another example. This is Google Maps in Sweden. On the right-hand side, you see the English version. On the left-hand side, you see the Swedish version. So after we launched directions, get directions, driving directions, walking directions globally, we saw that usage for driving directions, walking directions was very low in Sweden compared to its neighbors and compared to global as well. We didn't know the reason for that. We looked at logs and said, let's look at those and see what might be going wrong. We couldn't find anything. We hired a local consulting firm and said, help us figure out why we are not getting the usage. And again, we didn't make much progress. Anyone knows Swedish here? Can you tell what that word would mean? Pretty close, yeah. It's verbal translation is actually instructions. So again, without context, get directions and instructions would pretty much be okay from a translation perspective, but you would not expect somebody who's looking for driving directions to click on instructions to get driving directions. So when we corrected that, changed that to really mean get directions, as in driving directions, the usage went up and was at par with neighboring countries as well as from a global perspective. So just one more point on that front is getting it right matters in terms of when I say it means localization and internationalization, because it is important for a local user to feel that the product that they have has been developed for them. It's been designed for them, rather than feeling like it is something, it's an US or a English-only version shipped to them with some cosmetic changes. So we talked about that it's a two-step process, I-18N and L10N, so internationalization and localization. So let's go a little deeper in internationalization. So first is the I-18N design principle. Essentially, designing your product to be language and region independent is an important consideration. So I'll give you some examples where I-18N design, when done right from very beginning, can help you be successful in your international efforts. So here is an example. It could be from Google Plus, where it could be John Smith added 5% to his circles. This is, again, UI text. What might be wrong when we take this in other languages? What might go wrong in some of this? Yes. Good point. Any other? Yes. Good. So yeah, so the hard-coded aspects. Yes. That makes sense too. Yes, speak loudly. Good, very good point. I think so pretty much all of you were pretty close and right in all of those respects. So first is concatenation. So again, we are concatenating strings here, which pretty much always is a problem, because when translator gets this and they need to translate in certain language, they need to change the order of these placeholders, and then it would be difficult to do that. Second is the plural and gender agreement. And again, as it was mentioned earlier, in terms of what happens if that number is more than one. In English, you could essentially do person to persons, and that would solve it. But think of languages like Arabic, which has 6 different plural forms. So how do you handle that in meaningful ways? And again, from a gender agreement perspective, the name could be female, could be male. How do you handle that? And then, as was mentioned here, sometimes these could be hard-coded strings, so non-externalized strings, which again is a problem from a different language perspective. So how do you solve these? Well, one way is you do your research, go on internet, look on Google, all the different plural formats in different languages, and go ahead and create an algorithm for that. Rather, just use a library. So again, there is open source ICU, and I'll talk a little bit more details about the international components for Unicode. And you could use the plural and gender library available there for solving this, where you don't need to worry about what happens in different languages. That will take care of that. How many of you here are backend engineers, people who don't deal with UI strings? Well, you must be thinking when we saw the UI text example, well, I don't have to worry about the messy strings, so I can just zone off and I'll be fine. This example is just for you. This is an old example, but we learned a lot from this. This is a conceptual view of Google Video, where a user comes in, uploads their video, it gets stored in the servers, it gets indexed, and then the serving server will essentially, users will search for them and then will find the right videos. What we saw is whenever the video had the name of the video had strings which used Unicode, so non-ASCII strings, users couldn't find those videos. What could have gone wrong, or where things could have gone wrong? Will do. Okay. So anyone, if you want to just come into the aisle and talk about what might be wrong or where things might be wrong. Come to the aisle.
DB persistent in database?
Good point, yes. So that's one example where the database and the persistence in the backup might be an issue. Actually, it was all of the above. Every place where it could potentially fail failed. And again, there are the details there. The message here is IIT impacts the backend. And there were some design decisions that were made which had English assumptions. So I'll give you one specific example. Notice how the last part where upload, it required that the name of the video should at least be 3 characters. A reasonable assumption in English. You won't expect the name of the videos to be A, N, or something similar. But what happens when you have names which are in different languages? So the character which is shown there, I'll try to pronounce it, Carl, is one character which means dog in Chinese. And it's a very common name of video in terms of dog as the name. So clearly that assumption made it unusable for Chinese language. So again, from a perspective of, if you get from a design perspective, if you make right decisions, keeping into account the internationalization, you would be able to handle many of these situations right. And again, I'm happy to talk about in details about any of those after the talk if you have questions. So here's another example. This lists names of cities in English, and it's arranged in alphabetical order. In English, pretty straightforward, A, C, C, H, Z, makes sense, alphabetical order. In Slovak, the ch sound is actually a separate character which goes between, it's a separate letter which goes between H and I. So in that case, the ordering becomes a little different. In Danish, the A with a ring above it is actually a different letter, and again, it denotes a longer and a darker A, and it actually comes after Z. So in Danish, the alphabetical order would be that. So again, going back to the principle, do you need to know? If you use, let's say, the ASCII sorting or Unicode sorting, you would get it wrong, again, because each of the language has different nuances in terms of how the sorting is done. And this is, we are just looking at the Latin character languages. What happens if there are non-Latin script languages, Chinese, and so on? So again, from a perspective of how do you get it right? One, you could essentially look at and see how the sorting works in different languages, know about all these different characters, or you could use the library. And again, in ICU, there is a library which does the sorting right for you. So we talked about, I gave you 3 examples where if you get the IIT and designs right from the very beginning, it is useful to be successful from an internationalization perspective. Now let's look at how all of this comes together. How you will design your system, your architecture, so that it is right from the very beginning. So first aspect is, if you want to develop code that works across different countries and is effective, make sure your common code base is language and region independent. It is all Unicode, and that's where all your core language independent aspects go in. Anything which is dependent on language or location would essentially be handled through the libraries. We looked at some of the trickier examples earlier, but date formatting would be another example where you would handle them through the right libraries. And then there is the aspect of localization. Externalizing your resources, those could be strings, those could be images. So for example, hello world string extracted and then translated, localized into as many languages that you're targeting, and having those then externalized, and then once you get them back, serving for the right locale. That overall is the full picture in terms of the IIT summary for you in terms of getting the architecture right from an internationalization perspective. So let me introduce another concept, the right to left layout. So here what you're looking at is a right to left layout in English. Would you use this if you were to ask to use this on a day-to-day basis? Well, you probably would be okay using it once in a while. But what if there are no alternatives? If this is the interface that you have to use day in and day out, you won't feel really great about it. The same is the feeling for the people who use right to left languages. So those would be Arabic, Hebrew, Persian, Urdu, when they have to use the left to right interface. These languages are also called bidirectional languages. Why bidirectional? Because the strings go, or the text goes left to right, but the strings go right to left, and the numbers go left to right. So here is bidirectional layout done right, or the RTL layout done right. What you're typically used to seeing in Gmail on the left, they are on the right-hand side. And unlike some of the examples that we covered earlier, here it is not as simple as just using a library. For getting your RTL layout you need to spend some engineering effort to think about that from a design perspective and putting engineering efforts to get it right, and from some testing perspective as well. So we talked about some resources which are available. Getting the RTL layout right, you need to have some resources, not just beyond just getting the libraries. And again, I'll talk about some of the resources there. So why don't we look at some of the resources that are available to you in terms of helping you with your internationalization efforts. So the URL to go to is developers.google.com/international. And these resources, and again, I'll show you some of the ones listed here. What's good about these resources is that these are resources either that we have developed or we are actively contributing to. So anyways, for some reason, I can't display that, but I'll just continue talking based on that. Developers.google.com/international. That's where you'll see listing of about 18 resources, tools that are available to you. Some of them I will talk in detail in the resource section of the talk, but I want to highlight a few. So if you are using Clojure, or if you are using GWT, Google Web Toolkit, there are IIT9 libraries that can help you with internationalization in those cases. Similarly, if you are, as we talked about bidirectional and you need much beyond support than just using the libraries, there are a number of tools available here, the CSS mirroring tool, BiDi checker rule tool, and again, you can leverage some of those. One tool that I want to emphasize is the pseudo localization. So that's essentially the tool which allows you to mimic what happens in the actual translation in terms of text expansion and adding diacritics. So you would be able to see much before actual localization happens, how will your UI look like or UI layout look like when you translate into, let's say, German, where typical text expansion is 30%. Or you can use fake BiDi, which will help you to see how your BiDi layout look like. The advantage of doing that at the design, at the coding, at the testing time is that you save a lot of time. Instead of having to wait till actual translations come in, you could essentially use those at the design and the testing phase itself. So we looked at the step one, which is internationalization, making sure your code base is ready. The second step is localization, adapting the look and feel of your product for the languages, regions, and countries. So what are the key considerations that you need to look at for preparing for localization? The first is determining your target language set. It seems like an easy task, but requires a little bit attention in meaningful ways. So you might, well, if you're driven by getting more users, you might say, well, I want to go in where there are most users. So look at internet users and just go by that. You might say, well, I'm driven by revenue, and then in that case, whichever are the top revenue generating countries, you might target those. Or you might say, well, I would go in markets where my competition has already gone in, so they're clearly users, and I would also like to target them. Or you might say, well, I would like to go to those markets where there are no competitors so that you get the first mover advantage. So again, there are different strategies that you can use to decide what are your target languages, target countries, target locations, but that requires a little bit of thought initially as you do that. The second is make sure your localizable resources are separate from your source code, so they are in resource bundles or extracted so that they could be sent for translation easily. And then third is finding a localization vendor. In some cases, you have one-stop shops available, or you could essentially use vendors that do specialize in certain language pairs, or vendors who do multiple language pairs. Important aspect is the tool that they use or you are using. Make sure it has usage for tools, glossary, translation memory, and similar stuff. Let's look at a case study. Autodesk and AutoCAD WS is an app available in Google Play, available in iOS. So this was published in March 2013, and it talks about how they tripled their users by getting the localization right. So there are two aspects: tripled their users, so their download rate went up from 1,500 per day to about 5,000 per day within 6 months. They now have about 10 million users. 8.5 million of them do not speak English as their first language. So among other things that this case study talks about, one important aspect they stress is making sure your product listing page is localized properly. What does that mean? Making sure that it is not just translated, it is localized, made relevant for the market that you're targeting. So a few specific examples are, let's say app screenshots. So most of the time, your app screenshots have usernames. So John Smith. But for localization purposes, John Smith becomes Mario or Carlos if you are going in Spanish, or it becomes Dao for if you're going in Chinese. Similarly, units. From inches and feet, it becomes meters. From pound, it becomes kilos. So paying attention to the right units that are prevalent in that market. If you have images, making sure those images reflect the actual experience in that locale. And similarly, if you have maps, a Japanese user would relate more to a pinned location in Tokyo rather than in San Francisco. So making sure you pay attention to those minute details helps a lot, goes a long way in terms of making sure you get the right usage. Up to this point, Android app localization was difficult in terms of there was no easy way to, it was a tedious process. You actually had to extract your strings, identify a vendor, send it to the vendor outside, get those back, then integrate them back, and then put them back in Google Play. What we launched yesterday, and it's open for signups now, is ability to get your app localized from Play Dev Console itself. So again, if you go to your Dev Console today, you would see something like sign up to try the service, where you could essentially sign up now, and then I think next week the the apps will be whitelisted, and you can go through this process. The good part is now it is streamlined. It is right from the Play Dev Console. You can choose the right languages. You can choose the vendors, and do it from there. So again, you can find more details at developer.google.com/international, the Android section. And again, the URL is right there. I would encourage you to try this. Let's talk a little bit about the localization resources. Again, the URL, again, if you don't remember anything from this talk, remember developers.google.com/international. Right there, you will see the translation tools listed there as well. So first is Google Translation Toolkit. It's a CAT tool available for free. You can get your docs, your strings translated. All of Google's localization is done through Google Translation Toolkit. If you have YouTube videos and you would like to get the captions translated, again, that's the tool for doing that. The other tools which are available is machine translation, and again, translate.google.com. It serves millions of translations every day. There was a talk yesterday on using the Translate API for going global as well. And again, if you missed, you can essentially see that on YouTube. If you have website, there is this website element which you could install. It's a JavaScript, 3 lines of JavaScript which you put on your website, and it essentially shows your website in the target language based on when user comes in. So essentially, it detects the language and shows the page in that language. What is cool about this is that there is a customized element to it. It is not just machine translation. You could invite a family, you could invite friends to go in there and customize the page, make changes, and those will on the fly be live as well. Similarly, if you are an advertiser and you want to take your ads localized in different markets, you could essentially go to Global Advertiser Localization Guide, and you can see more details there in terms of how to do that. And we already talked about getting your apps localized. So now let me talk a little bit about some of the strategic considerations, resources, and practical tips. So first important consideration is when and where to launch. Where should you go launch your product, your app? Important thing to note is launching in a language is not the same as launching in a country. So for example, if you're targeting Spanish, it is whether you're targeting Spanish as in Spain or you're targeting Spanish as in Latin America, so ES419, which is the abstraction for all of Latin America, or you might be targeting specific countries within Latin America, so ES as in for Mexico, or you might be targeting Spanish users in US, so ES US. And again, what you're seeing there, ES419 and all of those are locale. So essentially, it's a combination of a language and country, and that uniquely defines where you're targeting. Then there's another consideration here is there are these multi-language countries. For example, Canada, Switzerland, Belgium. So let's say if you're targeting Canada, do you develop in English, your app for English? Do you develop for French? Or do you develop for both? So again, those are kind of considerations that you need to look into. Another set of considerations are law and the policy in those markets. So for example, there are location-based services are tricky in certain countries. EUA has a high sensitivity to privacy, so you need to take that into account. Thailand has strict lèse-majestic laws. So if you have user-generated content, it becomes tricky in that respect. And again, there's some censorship regimes in terms of China and Iran. Great Firewall of China. So if you're targeting these markets, how do you handle these scenarios? Here are some examples of if you need data to be localized in those markets, how do you provide that in meaningful ways? So for example, if you have Nairobi, if you're showing the weather in Nairobi, Kenya, you need business deals to get those feeds in meaningful ways. If you're showing the cricket scores on the news page in India, again, you need feeds for you to show all of those. So now let's talk a little bit about the resources. So first is the international components for Unicode. So I talked about that, about using the libraries. It provides you the libraries for handling time zones, currencies, date formats, and so on. It's available in Java, C, C++. It's open sourced. It's been ported to Python. And again, number of products, number of companies are using this today. Another important resource is input tools. Research has clearly shown that users are more likely to use your app, your product, if they can input in their own language. That's where Google Input Tools comes in. It's a collection of tools that provide users ability to input in their own, irrespective of which language they use, irrespective of which form factor, which device they are using. The tools that are offered in this are transliteration, virtual keyboard, input method editors, speech, handwriting. And again, they are available on irrespective of where you are. If you are using Windows PC, there's a Windows client. If you are using tablet or mobile, you can get for Android devices from Google Play Store. If you're on the web, it's already integrated in common Google products. So if you're using Gmail, Search, Docs, Translate, all of them are already there. And there's a Chrome extension, which allows you to use to integrate that in your own product and service. So let me quickly show you a video for that.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a product manager here at Google, and I'd like to talk to you about Google's Input Tools Chrome extension. With the Google Input Tools Chrome extension, you can use all of Google's great input technologies, not just on Google products, but anywhere you can input text on the web. To use the extension, first go to google.com/inputtools. Click Try It Out and install Chrome extension. Alternatively, you can just search the Chrome Web Store directly for Google Input Tools. Click Add it to Chrome. And once the Chrome extension is installed, you'll see the icon up here on your Chrome bar. Go ahead and click on it and click on Extension Options to select which languages and tools you want to use. As you can see, we support over 70 languages, and many languages support multiple input tools. I'll select Chinese Pinyin and French Virtual Keyboard and Hindi transliteration. Now that I've selected which languages and input tools I want to use, I can use it on any web page. For example, on Google+, I can use Chinese Pinyin to type easily in Chinese. But it's not just Google tools, you can also use it anywhere else on the web. So for example, I can use Hindi transliteration here on the Hindi version of Wikipedia. We hope you find the Google Input Tools Chrome extension to be as fun and easy to use as we do.
A few other resources to talk about. Lib phone number library. It essentially helps you to handle all international phone numbers. It encapsulates all the intricacies in terms of area codes, country codes, and it works for all regions of the world. It is useful for formatting, storing, validating international phone numbers. And again, used by not only by Google products, but a lot of other companies as well. The lib address input is very similar. It handles the international address formats. It's useful for the layout and validations for all regions. Fonts, what you're looking at is, let's say if a page doesn't have the right text to handle the fonts in that, to display the page. In that case, you see tofu, those squares on the page. One of the aim of that we are aiming for is to remove all the tofus from the web. One step for doing that is essentially creating a font that can handle all characters in Unicode, irrespective of the language. And we're calling the Pan Unicode font No-To, so short form for No Tofu. This would be available, so the fonts are free for use, for everyone to use. They will be available from code.google.com/pnoto. That's where you will find the font, and it's available under the Apache license 2.0. Another useful tool is the sFontly library. It's a C and Java library, which helps you in creating, using, and editing sFontly container fonts, sFontly container-based fonts. So for example, the OpenType or the TrueType. It is used, for example, by the Google Cloud Print for subsetting the fonts for PDF printing. So we have touched upon the various steps that you need to have. We have talked about why internationalization makes sense. What I want to do next logical question is, I have now a localized app, but how will I find the global customers, or how will the global customers find me? So important steps in that respect is, I'm giving you some tips in terms of marketing your app in marketplace in meaningful ways. So first is localize your marketplace metadata. That by itself, making sure your text, your title, your short description, long descriptions are localized, that by itself will make sure your app ranking goes up significantly. Maximize your search potential, so know which are your key keywords, include them in your short description, title, long descriptions. Why? Because again, search accounts for 2/3 of the total app installs. More than half of all Google Play users look for apps on a weekly basis. And more than 6 million unique phrases are searched on a daily basis. Sometimes some developers have asked, well, can I just do a month of promotion and marketing and will I be fine? Not really. Investing long-term is the right way to go from a globalization efforts perspective. And as we saw in the case study on Autodesk, localizing app screenshot, reflecting the actual user experience in the locale is very important. One, from getting more installs, but more importantly, for minimizing your number of uninstalls. And that, again, is a key factor in terms of your app ranking. So just to summarize, we have talked about a number of things here. So if you forget most of the stuff or you don't remember stuff, remember a few things. One, it makes sense to go international. Two, it is really simple to get started. Just remove your hard-coded strings, externalize them, use a few libraries, get your family and friends to help you to localize in one language, and that would be a good starting point. And remember, there are lots of resources available to you to help with respect to I18N and L10N. The URL to remember, developers.google.com/international. Again, we would love the feedbacks. This is the link to the survey, so there are the QR code right there as well. Do we have time for some questions? Why don't we take a few questions, and then I'll be available here. Yeah, come to the aisle and, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I have an app on the Android Market or Google Play Store that's about 300K in size, just in English. Each language I localize it to adds another 50 or 60K. If I cover eFigs, I've doubled the size of the app. Is that a problem? I mean, am I the only person who thinks that's a problem? And is Google going to do anything about that, either by letting the market sort applications by, or serve up different versions of the app by language, or adding support for downloadable DLLs that include the localization?
So if the size becomes an issue, one way to handle that is, again, you can separate them by the language in meaningful ways. But yes, if you have a localized version, that is prioritized in terms of ranking perspective and overall promoting that. So again, getting the localized version makes a big difference.
So I could build my app, I could build a separate APK for each of the languages.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That works. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kealoha Yoshioka from Hawaii, and first I just want to say thank you very much for providing a Hawaiian language version of Google.
Great.
For us, and also for the Maori from New Zealand. The input tools, however, does not have our Hawaiian keyboard or our Maori keyboard, and we've been trying to find somebody to talk to about adding that in for the Unicode set. Are you the right person, and is this the right place?
Yes, so we can talk about that. So again, yes, I agree with you. Input tools doesn't support that today, but we can talk about that. And what we need is essentially a dedicated team who can provide us the meaningful inputs, and it could be incorporated. That's how we did the Hawaiian version, for example. So we can talk about that. Yes.
Hello, my name is Sean from Day Translations, and as we own a localization firm, and I would like to know how to reach out more to the Android developers and the Google developers, so that we can actually become a vendor for a lot of these firms.
Right.
And also, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. No, so we are, as I said, the initial pilot phase is launching today. It launched yesterday. The way to get yourself enrolled is, as we said, the initial pilot is with 6 vendors, but we are looking to expand and scale all of that. So again, GTM vendor support is the right mailing list to use, and that's where you can send a note, and again, we can talk in details here, and that's where we can get started.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tanya from TED Conferences. We're queuing up for an app release that's localized, and I have 2 questions. The first is, if the app is localized in Spanish, ES, is it offensive to release it in Mexico?
Okay, very good question. So there are nuances in terms of Spanish version in Latin America, specifically in Mexico versus in Spanish as in Spain. It is not offensive, but it is not very user-friendly. So when somebody in Mexico looks at Spanish as in Spain, they can kind of understand it, but they do realize that it is not something which is made for them. So they would be like, yes, I can use it, it's usable, versus the love factor, or I just want to use it, comes when you have more localized version. ES419 does that, for example.
Do you recommend that we do it or don't?
Yeah, explore the ES419, which essentially
Okay.
does it for all of Latin America. Unless
Okay.
you are very specifically targeting Mexico, then you can explore the ES as in Mexico as well.
Okay, and then the second question, all about offending people, is that in the app there are, you can kind of browse content through tags, and tags are not translated because it's dynamic.
Right.
So even though the app is like the UI and everything is localized, the content translation, everything is localized, the only thing that isn't are tags.
Right.
Is it better to just leave it in English, or is it better to remove it as a feature?
I think as a good starting point, leaving them in English is a good starting point. And again, we can talk about how you can handle the dynamic aspects of those. So again, I'll be available here. So just in the interest of time, making sure
Thank
I know
you.
this is lunchtime. So thank you everyone for coming. Rate the sessions and enjoy the lunch. I'll be here available if you have further questions. I can answer those.